Helene Anderson, who went by Nikki, was born on October 15, 1958, in South Bend, Indiana. At the beginning of 1986, 27-year-old Nikki was living in a duplex at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Bremerton, Washington, and working at a nearby Arby's restaurant. She shared the home on Magnolia Drive with her 2 children, 4-year-old Adrienne and 7-month-old Marcus. Adrienne's father, Kenny Hale, has described his daughter as a gift from God, with a charming smile and a strong personality, even at her young age. He says she was a very advanced child who could spell her name when she was just 2 years old. Kenny and Nikki's relationship had not worked out, but they remained in each other's lives because of their love for their daughter. They co-parented Adrienne together very well, and regularly spent time together with her. In January of 1986, Nikki was engaged to the father of her son. Her fiancé was serving in the United States Navy and was stationed in San Diego. She was in the process of packing up her home in preparation of moving to California to be near him. Adrienne would be staying in Washington with Kenny for a period of time while her mother got settled in California before joining her there. Kenny was at Nikki's home on the evening of January 29th, spending time with Adrienne after he got off of work. When the time came for Kenny to leave, Adrienne asked him if she could spend the night at his house. He thought about bringing her home with him, but ultimately told his daughter no, because he did not want Adrienne to have to wake up extra early so that he could bring her back to Nikki's house so as to keep her on her usual schedule. He told Adrienne he would see her the next day before he left for the evening. Adrienne waved to him from the house's front window as he left. Kenny returned to the home on Magnolia Drive the following evening as planned. He was surprised when there was no answer when he knocked on the front door. Disappointed, he turned around to leave. However, as he did, he could hear Nikki's son Marcus whimpering inside the house. Concerned, he tried the front door and found that it was unlocked. He had trouble fully opening the door, as something inside was blocking the door's path. Kenny tripped over something as he entered the home. When he reached down, he grabbed something stiff. His heart dropped when he realized he was holding his daughter's leg. It was dark inside the home, but Kenny could see Adrienne lying on the floor near the front door, and Nikki lying further inside the home. Kenny grabbed baby Marcus, who was in a playpen just feet away from his mother, and ran next door to the neighbor's home to get help. While the neighbor called police, Kenny ran back to Adrienne. Not knowing how long she had been there, he frantically began performing CPR on his daughter. Tragically, his efforts could not save his little girl. It would later be determined that Adrienne and Nikki had been dead, and baby Marcus had been alone in the home with their bodies for approximately 20 hours. Nikki and Adrienne had both been strangled to death. In addition, Nikki had suffered blows to the back of her head. Defensive wounds showed that she had fought fiercely against her killer. She had been sexually assaulted, which police believed was the motive for her murder. Robbery did not appear to be a motive, as valuables that were out in plain sight had been left behind. Adrienne had been found in her pajamas, with the comforter from her bed near her. Investigators theorized that she had been woken up by the noise created by the struggle of the killer attacking her mother, and she had come into the living room to see what was going on. Based on where her body was found, she appears to have tried to escape the house, with the killer catching her just before she reached the front door. Police believed she was killed because she saw her mother's killer and was old enough to potentially identify him. Police theorized that 7-month-old Marcus was not killed because he was not old enough to describe or identify the killer. The killer placed Marcus in a playpen, along with a cushion he removed from a nearby couch. Nikki's neighbor on the other side of the duplex says she did not hear anything the night of the murders. Normally, she could hear everyday noises through their shared wall, but she heard no screams or a struggle that night. She later said that she had an ear infection at the time, which may have impacted her hearing. she did hear Marcus crying throughout the day following the murders, but assumed it was just his normal cries for food or a fresh diaper. 2 other witnesses in the neighborhood reported hearing one scream the night of the murders, but nothing else. Numerous people had come to the home looking for Nikki on January 30th, including an acquaintance, a coworker, and a furniture salesman. Some of them came to the home multiple times, but no one tried to open the front door until that evening, when Kenny Hale heard Marcus crying. Nikki's fiancé was confirmed to have been on duty at his naval base in San Diego at the time of the murders, eliminating him as a potential suspect. While Kenny Hale did have an alibi for the time of the murders as well, he remained under suspicion in the early days of the investigation. Police were skeptical of the peaceful co-parenting relationship he had with Nikki, viewed her upcoming move as a potential motive, and knew Kenny had regular access to the home. Kenny wanted to do whatever he could to help with the investigation, and was shocked when he realized he was being considered as a suspect. His sister told him he should hire a lawyer soon after the murders. Kenny did not see how this would be necessary, but took her advice, which quickly proved to be a wise decision when he was aggressively questioned by police. Kenny agreed to undergo a voluntary polygraph examination, but his lawyer terminated the exam halfway through it, pointing out that Kenny was still too emotionally distraught for the results of the examination to be accurate. According to Kenny, after he walked out of the police station that day, it would be a decade before he heard anything more from police. The case soon went cold, with police following up on all the leads they could initially identify within the first 6 to 8 months of the investigation. Authorities identified a handful of potential suspects, including the boyfriend of Nikki's aunt, a neighbor who had babysat Adrienne, and a man whose car was seen in the neighborhood that night, but none of them could be tied to the murders. The case was reopened by police in 1993, 2003, 2009, and 2019, but the renewed efforts have so far not led to any arrests. In the later efforts, Kenny Hale was contacted by investigators and made aware of their ongoing efforts. There is one major clue in the case, but authorities have so far been unable to use it to identify the killer. DNA evidence, believed to be from the killer, was found at the scene. The exact source of the DNA has not been publicly disclosed. Bremerton Police Detective Marty Garland, who has most recently been overseeing the investigation, has stated that it is unclear if the sexual assault against Nikki was, in his words, completed. A local newspaper reported in 2010 that a drop of blood that did not belong to either Nikki or Adrienne had been found on Adrienne's nightgown, but this has not been confirmed as the source of the DNA. Unfortunately, wherever the DNA came from, it has proven to be of limited use to the investigation. Despite advanced testing, the DNA profile that was developed is not complete. It is not a complete enough profile for investigators to be allowed by law to run it through criminal databases or use genetic genealogy to identify the killer. The only option investigators have is to directly compare it to samples taken from suspects they are able to identify. All of the men known to have been close to Nikki, including Kenny Hale, have been tested and eliminated as a contributor of the DNA. There were no signs of forced entry into Nikki's house. Investigators do not believe she would have opened her door to someone she did not know in the middle of the night, since no one known to be associated with her has been a match to the DNA. Investigators theorize that the killer was known by Nikki well enough for her to open her door for them, but not so well that he could be identified by the other people in her life. When he was contacted by different detectives over the years, Kenny Hale did not feel particularly optimistic about their efforts. When Detective Garland took over the case and contacted him, however, Kenny felt differently. Detective Garland has looked into numerous potential avenues of investigation in the case in recent years. He has conducted further DNA testing, investigated known serial killers, and even explored the possibility of having Nikki's son Marcus, who was just 7 months old at the time of the murders, undergo hypnosis. He believes he is close to solving the case if he can just track down the right individual to compare the DNA from the crime scene to. Nikki's son Marcus is now in his 30s and lives in Mississippi, where his father, Nikki's fiancee at the time of her murder, also lives. Kenny Hale still struggles with the loss of his daughter and with remembering the brutal end to her young life. He has albums full of pictures he took of her, but sometimes he cannot look through them in their entirety because he becomes too emotional. While his relationship with Nikki did not work out, he still describes her as a beautiful person who did not deserve her violent death and hopes to get justice for her as well. As painful as revisiting the murders is for him, he will not give up on his daughter and her mother, or on finally getting answers in their case. It gets kinda hard to go back and relive the story, he told the Daily Beast in 2022. But as long as I got air in my lungs and am able to tell their story, I'll keep telling their story until I can't tell it no more.